The third princess of the empire, Celicia, came to my coming-of-age ceremony, and I personally welcomed her. As I was chatting with her, the tone of her speech sent chills down my body. At the same time, the brave Ariel and the holy maiden Lee also came to my coming-of-age ceremony. Although Ariel finds my personality changes strange, she is very wary and doesn't want me to get close to Lee. Then, the ball began. I invited Celicia to dance with me, and hope she can come to my room. After welcoming Celicia, other dukes also arrived one after another. Grand Duke Ron is going to greet the other dukes. He patted Moen's shoulder and said to him with a smile on his face, "I'm going to receive the other two dukes. I leave it to you. Remember not to neglect the Royal Highness Princess." Moen confidently said to his father, "I understand, Father." Moen placed one hand on his chest, bowed to Celicia, and walked towards her direction. Celicia also noticed the protagonist of tonight's coming-of-age ceremony, Moen, from a distance. She took the initiative to talk to him. "Long time no see, young Master Moen." Moen smiled at her and praised her outfit for today. "Long time no see, Princess Celicia. You are extraordinarily beautiful today." Celicia didn't feel happy because of his words. She coldly replied to him, "Is that so? Thank you for your compliment. But it's really rare to hear such praise from young Master Moen's mouth." Then, she lifted her skirt with both hands, leaned forward slightly, and bowed to Moen. Her movements flow smoothly, elegant, and beautiful, perfectly showcasing the princess temperament she possesses. Moen smiled politely, covered his chest with one hand, and bowed slightly, performing a return salute. He seemed to be able to hear that Celicia was talking about his bad personality. "Aha, Your Highness. What you're saying makes me seem like the kind of rude person who can't even control their mouth. Don't you think so?" Suddenly, Celicia looked at him with a cold gaze, and even lowered her tone when talking to him. Moen didn't know how to reply to her for a moment. He felt a chill from her tone of voice, spreading throughout his entire body. To ease the embarrassment, Moen smiled and immediately changed the topic. He reached out his hand and gestured for her to rest in the nearby rest area first. "Haha, Your Highness must be tired from coming from the royal city. Why don't you go take a break first? The banquet won't officially start until a little later." Celicia didn't say anything more about the topic just now. She followed his instruction and turned around to walk towards the rest area. "Well, that would be appreciated." As Celicia's figure gradually faded away, Moen's tense emotions finally eased. He exhaled a breath and scratched his head with his hand. He was really a bit overwhelmed by the icy aura that Celicia emitted. He silently said in his heart, "She's finally gone. Beautiful is really beautiful. Scary is also really scary. Worthy of being the first female lead in the novel, this aura is really scary." Celicia walked towards the rest area and met two nobles again. The two nobles politely bowed to her, and she gently lifted the hem of her skirt in return. However, she seemed to be still thinking about Moen's every move and way of speaking just now. She noticed that he seemed somewhat different from before today. "Today's him, I feel a bit different from before." She turned her head and secretly looked at Moen, who was still standing there receiving guests. She pondered with a puzzled expression. Is it because he has become a little more polite? At this moment, there was a slight commotion in the crowd, followed by some voices of discussion coming from within. This caught Moen's attention. Although the voice was very low, he could hear clearly what the nobles were discussing. He perked up his ears and listened carefully. I can't believe that illegitimate daughter is here. Is she the person who recently dueled with her betrothed partner? I heard that the Duke Bugard has just handed over the position of heir to her. Oh my, this person is not only an illegitimate child, but also a woman. How did she qualify to inherit the earldom? Moen turned his head to look towards the direction of the door, and the person the nobles were discussing had already walked in. I really don't know what Duke Bugard is thinking. The Duke is also present, don't let him hear. There is a tall girl and a short girl walking side by side. The nobles standing on both sides of the door secretly looked at them with unfriendly eyes. Although the nobles were still discussing them quietly with others, they seemed indifferent. Moen looked at them seriously. For these two people, he is the most familiar, especially the tall girl standing on the left. She has finally arrived. The true protagonist of the original story, the ultimate girl overlord of this world. Ariel Bugard. The tall girl on the left is the brave Ariel Bugard. The person standing on her right is the holy maiden Lee Angel. Because they didn't come in formal attire, they stood out among all the nobles. However, Ariel didn't care about these things. She crossed her hands on her chest and walked ahead with a cold expression. Lee seemed a bit scared of crowded places and kept pinching Ariel's clothes, hiding behind her. Ariel raised her hand and greeted Moen naturally. Hey, young Master Moen. We meet again. How have you been lately? Moen looked at her with a smile on his face. He raised his hand, about to greet Ariel with a polite gesture. Suddenly, someone stepped out from beside him. An obese nobleman wearing glasses suddenly stood in front of Moen. He pointed his hand very excitedly at Ariel and raised his voice, saying very rudely, "You lowly illegitimate daughter, how can you talk to our young master Moen?" Moen was stunned by his behavior and froze in place. He instantly felt something was wrong. If he let that nobleman continue talking, something big would happen. Shut up. He immediately pounced on the obese nobleman with a frightened expression, covering his mouth with his hand and preventing him from continuing to speak. The obese nobleman was startled by Moen's movements and struggled with his hands in the air. He didn't expect Moen to suddenly do this. Ariel looked at the scene before her and felt speechless. Moen awkwardly forced a smile as he pressed his hand firmly over the obese nobleman's mouth. He said to Ariel nervously, "I have been doing well lately, Miss Ariel Bugard. Thank you for your concern." Ariel was somewhat stunned by Moen's sudden change in personality and polite response. She felt a little surprised and couldn't believe her eyes. "Huh? You?" She lowered her head, covered her mouth with her hand, and pondered why he had become like this. What's going on here? This guy didn't call me a lowly, illegitimate girl like before. His brain, about the size of a nucleolus, can actually remember my full name. Has he come to his senses? Or is he having some conspiracy? Lee was not quite sure about the current situation. She looked at Ariel with worried eyes. Ariel. Suddenly, Moen greeted Lee. He politely reached out his hand and said to her in a relaxed tone, "You must be Miss Lee." Lee was startled by his sudden movement. She looked at him with fear and said in great surprise, "Ah, young Master Moen actually knows my name?" Moen slightly bent down and extended his hand forward, wanting to shake hands with her. He said to her gently with a smile on his face, "Of course. How could I not know the names of the important guests tonight? Miss Lee Angel." Just as Moen wanted to shake hands with Leah in a friendly manner, his hand was slapped away hard by Ariel. Moen was somewhat surprised by Ariel's behavior and stared at her blankly. She looked at him warily and said to him in an unkind tone, "What would you do?" She seemed to be under the mistaken impression that Moen was going to do something out of the ordinary to Lee. However, in reality, he didn't do anything strange. Lee looked at them nervously, feeling uneasy about the current situation. The nearby nobles heard Ariel's voice and looked towards them. Ariel approached Moen very angrily, her whole body pressed against Moen's chest. Moen felt that her emotions were not right and awkwardly leaned back. He lowered his head and said to her nervously, "Miss Ariel." Before he could finish speaking, Ariel spoke to him in an angry tone. "Moen Campbell, listen carefully." She looked at him with a disgusted expression and tapped his shoulder hard with her hand. "I came purely because of your father's face. I don't care what kind of plot you have, just come at me. If you dare to think anything against Lee, I'll never let you go." After issuing a warning to Moen, Ariel turned around and headed straight down the hall. Without looking back, she said to Lee, who was standing behind her, "Lee, let's go." Lee nervously turned around to look at Moen, while stuttering in response to Ariel's words. Moen looked at them without saying anything more, just watching them leave. Moen caressed his chest up and down with his hands, trying to ease the tension he had just experienced. He closed his eyes, awkwardly smiled, and silently said in his heart, "Ah, it seems that the misunderstanding between original Moen Campbell and her was really deep." Then he turned around and walked towards the second floor. He needs to prepare for his coming-of-age speech later. He looked ahead with a smile on his face, no longer worried about what would happen next. Well, forget it. As long as tonight passes, our fate will be two completely disjointed parallel lines. From now on, you will be your savior, and I will be my laborer. We will both have a bright future. Miss Girl Overlord. In no time, Moen's coming-of-age ceremony began. It began with his speech as the opening. He stood with his parents on the observation deck on the second floor. He bowed to the nobles and then began to deliver his speech. The nobles on the first floor all looked up, fixed their gaze on him, and listened attentively to his speech. So, under the guidance of my dear parents, Moen placed his hand on his chest and looked forward with a firm gaze. Whenever he finishes a speech, his parents standing behind him smile and applaud him. For their grown-up son, they are very happy inside. I, Moen Campbell, have completed my coming-of-age speech at the age of 18, witnessed by all the nobles of the empire. From today on, I can also be considered the official heir of the Campbell family, but unfortunately, when his parents were applauding for him, the nobles on the first floor smiled at him and joined them in applauding for him. Although he gave a coming-of-age speech according to the plot in the novel, he had to face what happened next. After tonight, the direction of his story in the novel will also change. The identity of this heir may only be limited to tonight. The speech lasted for a relatively long period of time. Finally, with warm applause from everyone, Moen concluded his speech. He exhaled and loosened his tie with his hand, allowing himself to catch his breath. He said with a sense of relief, "Finally, it's over." At this point, the coming-of-age ball has already begun. The nobles found their dance partners one after another and danced in the center of the hall. Moen looked at the crowd, pondering what he was preparing to do. Next, I should prepare for the main task. Moen glanced at the dance party and then at the nobles chatting beside him. He looked around, trying to find Celicia's figure. Princess Celicia. Suddenly, he noticed a figure in front of the French window. Found her. That's Celicia. She didn't attend the dance and stood alone in front of the French window. She held up red wine and quietly watched the night view outside the window. Moen went to the French window and bowed to Celicia. He felt a little sorry for leaving her here alone. I unexpectedly let the noble Royal Highness Princess be left alone. It seems that I acted disrespectfully. Celicia turned her head to look at him with some confusion. She raised an eyebrow. Moen Campbell. Moen elegantly extended one hand and placed the other behind her, making an invitation gesture to Celicia. I don't know if I'm lucky enough to invite you to dance with me? Celicia asked in confusion. Are you inviting me? He answered her softly. Of course, my beautiful highness. Celicia hesitated for a moment, wanting to say something to him. However, at this moment, she couldn't say anything. She closed her eyes, sighed, and placed one hand on Moen's hand. Well, tonight is your coming-of-age ceremony. I naturally have no reason to refuse. Moen smiled and thanked her for accepting his invitation. Thank you, Your Highness. At this moment, the nobles who were drinking and chatting were all looking in one direction. They all looked at the center of the dance floor with surprised eyes. Some nobles occasionally whispered to the people next to them about the scene in front of them. Ah, that is. What? Lee saw the person in the center of the dance floor and quickly tugged at Ariel's hem, reminding her to look over there. Ariel, look! Ariel, who was busy eating dessert, heard Lee calling her and looked up at the dance floor. She asked Lee in confusion. What's wrong? Accompanied by music, Moen and Celicia danced elegantly in the center of the dance floor under everyone's gaze. They held hands with each other, changing different dance moves. Celicia danced slowly to his rhythm, while lifting her head and softly praising his dance steps. Your dance steps are good. Moen smiled back at her and humbly said, Thank you for your praise, but it's just at the beginner's level. Celicia carefully observed Moen's face. Through tonight's conversation with him, Celicia can confirm that there have been changes in him compared to before. You have indeed changed a bit, Moen Campbell. Moen had some doubts about her words. What aspect? Is it that I'm not behaving like a nobleman? She said to him expressionlessly. No, it's the way you invite people. Upon hearing Celicia's words, Moen became even more puzzled. Invitation method? He didn't quite know how the original Moen Campbell used to invite others. Celicia explained to him. I remember the last time you invited the daughter of a viscount to the academy ball. You said that. Celicia imitated the tone and expression of Moen's speech at that time. Woman, rejoice and cheer. I have mercifully rewarded you with a dance with me. After listening, Moen awkwardly tilted his head aside. He didn't expect the original Moen Campbell to say so. He stuttered. No, wait. Celicia stared at Moen and returned to her original cold tone and said to him, How is it? Did I imitate it well? Moen smiled awkwardly at her. It was my mistake. Your Highness Celicia, can you please forget about that time? At that moment, the band playing in the hall played the tune to the next part. The people on the dance floor also changed their dance positions. Moen and Celicia changed their dance moves to another one. Celicia leaned against Moen, who held her hand. He lowered his head and whispered in Celicia's ear. After this dance, may I invite your Highness to come to my room? Celicia thought he had other ideas. She intends to reject him. Moen Campbell, although you and I are engaged, I understand, Your Highness. I have no intention of crossing over. Moen knew what Celicia wants to say. In order to prevent her from rejecting him, he came up with a reason. What I want to discuss with Your Highness in detail is about the engagement. Celicia raised her eyebrows gently. Oh?